The name and date of the first public library is contested, but the American Library Association notes there are 3 libraries that vie for the recognition. The first dates back to the days of Benjamin Franklin. He and some friends established the Library Company of Philadelphia in November 1731 as a subscription library supported by its shareholders. Books were not widely available at this time and had to be shipped to the colonies from Europe. The average person could not afford this luxury, and even those with means could not afford extensive personal libraries. By pooling their resources, the intellectuals of the day could acquire and share books. Benjamin Franklin convinced the group to take it a step further and convinced shareholders to offer the collection as a lending library to the public. Then there was the Peterborough Town Library in New Hampshire. Established in 1833, it boasts as the first institution funded by a municipality with the purpose of establishing a free library that would be open to all classes of the community. Boston Public Library, founded in 1848, is considered the first free municipal library in a large community. What can be said about all 3 of these institutions is that they laid the groundwork for public libraries that were established across the U.S., including the establishment of the public library that serves the city of Florence and the wider county of Lauderdale in Alabama. Before there was a public library, there were schools. The first school was located about 3 miles north of Florence on Cox Creek. It was founded in 1820 by General John Coffee and Dr. John R. Bedford. The men shared adjacent plantation properties. They hired Professor James Lawrence as teacher of this school for their children and those on neighboring plantations. Other schools soon followed, including the Florence Male Academy. It was founded around 1832. This is an ad for the Academy published in 1840. Reading was a popular pastime with many people, so much so that the week of April 3rd, 1861, the superintendent of the Methodist Church Sunday School published a special request in the Florence Gazette, seen here. He requested the return of 1,000 copies of Long King's Notes on the Gospel and several other missing titles. This ad is clear evidence that churches were among the first institutions, along with schools, to have libraries. The various societies at Florence Wesleyan University also had libraries. In March of 1873, the Florence Times-Journal noted that these libraries, too, had missing books. This ad was placed in the Florence Times-Journal, suggesting appointing a librarian to oversee their collection and prevent items from disappearing. But there was hope for avid readers who struggled to find free reading material. By January 1895, Florence Normal School, which was a successor to Florence Wesleyan since 1872, allowed non-students to use its library each day until noon and from 3 to 5 in the afternoons. Residents who had means could purchase books at one of several booksellers and drugstores in town, as seen in these ads from the Florence Gazette. For readers who couldn't find titles they wanted in local bookstores, mail order companies apparently did a brisk business. In December 1905, Florence merchants sponsored a contest with a special prize of that time period. A $600 library of, quote, high-class books, unquote, would be given to the institution that received the most votes. Some local businesses or associations founded their own libraries. In June 1889, W.O. Skelton, D.G. Charles, and others were contemplating the foundation of a mechanics institute that would have its own library. It isn't known whether this institute and library were ever founded. In January 1889, the Wheeler Rifles Militia Company was organized in Florence, with Captain Julian Field in command and assigned to the 3rd Regiment Alabama State Troops. The Wheeler Rifles soon organized their own library in their Armory Hall with public access. The yearly fee was $1. By late August 1890, the library was open every Thursday between 4 and 6 p.m. It boasted 650 volumes. In February 1896, a Young Men's Christian Association, or YMCA, was founded in East Florence. Downtown Florence already had a YMCA. This East Florence Association was founded by young men employed by the various factories in this part of town, such as the Wagon Works, the Stove Foundry, and the Pump and Lumber Company. The East Florence YMCA had a hall or building located near the wagon factory. In December 1899, Wagon Works founder and physician Dr. Alfred David Bellamy established a library for employees of the factory, signing a contract with the H. Parmalee Library Company of Chicago. The company offered a rotating package library. Under the Parmalee contract, every quarter for 5 years, a different collection of volumes would be rotated in and out of the library. The library was housed at the East Florence YMCA Hall. In July 1909, Maud Lindsay of Florence's Free Kindergarten established a library in East Florence for children. But until 1885, there was still no public library in town. Between late 1880 and early 1883, William C. Sherrod moved to Florence from Silver Lake in Desha County, Arkansas, with his wife Amanda and 7 children. He was a Cortland, Alabama native, Confederate colonel, former U.S. Senator, and Alabama legislator. Sherrod was one of the founders of the Florence Land, Mining, and Manufacturing Company, which was instrumental in bringing about the industrial boom of the 1880s and early 1890s in Florence. In 1885, Amanda Sherrod called together a group of women in Florence who were interested in establishing a public library. These women were Rachel Morgan, Mattie Irvin, Mrs. Robert T. Simpson, Catherine McFarland, seen here, Dora Bliss, Cornelia Lee, Susan Price, also seen here, Elizabeth Kirkman O'Neill, and Mrs. T. E. Eastburn. The women offered Mrs. Sherrod the office of president, but she reportedly declined on the grounds that the group, soon to be known as the Ladies' Library Association, wasn't yet big enough for officers. Sally Collier, in 1885, was a matron at the Florence Presbyterian Female Synodical College. She, with President Walker, oversaw the literary department. In November 1885, the Synodical College offered to house the ladies' library in some of its academy rooms. The Florence Synodical Female College consisted of a small 3-story brick academy building. Beside it, on the same lot, was a large dormitory building where the students boarded. These buildings were originally constructed in 1847 as the Florence Female Academy. Since 1913, it has been the site of the John McKinley Federal Post Office building. The Synodical College closed in mid to late 1899, and its library was donated to the Ladies' Library, then known as the Southern Library. As Florence's second courthouse was then under construction, the building was used as a temporary courthouse. The office of library director rotated each month, with a different woman of the association serving in that capacity. By July 1889, the Ladies' Library was open on Thursday afternoons between 5 and 6. Over the years, several of the women would serve as librarians. Miss Bunny Smith was the first known librarian in 1889. By early 1892, the library hours were from 3 o'clock until 4:30 on Thursdays. At that time, there were 2 librarians on staff, Josie Milner and Carrie Morgan, as shown in this City Notes article from the Florence Herald of March 10, 1892. One of the women would always be on duty on the stated afternoon. The Ladies' Library was a subscription library with an annual fee of $1. The Library Association noted in 1803 that nearly every dollar subscribed was used to buy books. The association also stocked its shelves using generous donations by patrons and subscribers, such as Congressman Joe Wheeler, shown on the left, who in April 1897 contributed, quote, a number of valuable volumes from the departments at Washington, unquote. Another benefactor was Columbus P. Smith, shown on the right, of Smithsonia at the bend of the river in West Lauderdale County. On May 25, 1897, the Herald noted that Columbus Smith donated a set of the works of Washington Irving to the Ladies' Library. Fundraisers were also routinely held to raise money, such as these advertised in the Florence Herald and the Florence Democrat. As a result, by 1898, the Ladies' Library boasted 2,000 volumes in its collection. At some point between November 1897 and January 1898, the Ladies' Library Association had relocated to the first floor of City Hall on the southwest corner of West Tennessee and Short Court Street. Construction on this building was completed in 1891. Entrance to the library was up a set of stairs on the Tennessee Street side of the building. On November 10, 1899, the Florence Herald noted that the library occupied 2 rooms in the City Hall building, with an arch cut between the rooms. In late May of 1901, the Ladies' Library moved upstairs to the second floor of City Hall. In March 1902, the library had relocated to the first floor. This image shows the City Hall building as it was depicted in the Sanborn Fire insurance maps of November 1899. The red indicates that it was a brick building. At the time that the Ladies' Library was growing, the Southern Library Association of Knoxville, Tennessee, established a circulating library in the drugstore of Dr. James Burtwell on Court Street in February 1896. The circulating library was also a subscription library, with memberships costing $2 a year. For each 100 members, the Southern Library Association would supply 200 books, with new titles to be rotated in every 4 months. Unfortunately, nothing further is known of the circulating library or how long it was open. In May 1898, the Ladies' Library Association was reorganized and incorporated as the Southern Library Association. The new association's bylaws established 4 committees: executive, finance, book, and entertainment. The association president was an ex officio member of each of the 4 committees. The president had the authority to appoint the members of the various committees as well as the librarian. By January 1903, the Southern Library Club had been established to assist with library efforts. In May 1912, the Library Club was reorganized as the Firenze Club and exists to this day by that name. Meanwhile, attempts at founding a larger, more permanent public library continued. By November 1899, plans were being made for a 3-story brick building library between the Florence Wagon Works and what was known as the Old Town, most likely between the foot of Maxwell Hill and the L&N Railroad Depot. Plans called for the first floor to be used as storerooms, the second floor as the actual library and reading rooms, while the third floor would be reserved for use by the various fraternal orders of East Florence. Dr. Alfred David Bellamy, shown here, was founder of the Florence Wagon Works and the Bellamy Planing Mills. He started the subscription for the library with a $500 donation. This may be the reason C.W. Howard of the Parmalee Library Company of Chicago was in town gauging public support for establishing a Parmalee Library station in Florence. Yet, for whatever reason, this 3-story building between downtown and East Florence was never built. In 1903, city officials voted to sell the City Hall building and constructed a smaller building 2 blocks up the street on the vacant O'Neill lot. Conditions attached to the sale by the city stipulated that the buyers use the old building for a hotel for a period of not less than 5 years. R. Lee Glenn and Mason J. Dillard paid $10,000 for the building and soon thereafter opened the Hotel Jefferson. With the sale of City Hall, the Ladies' Library was forced to relocate, moving in June 1903 to an empty room in the basement of the courthouse shown here. It would remain at this location for the next 30 years. In early August 1911, the Southern Library Association approached Florence city officials for assistance in founding a Carnegie Library. Between 1883 and 1929, more than 2,500 Carnegie Libraries were built across the United States, including 17 in Alabama. They were achieved through construction grants made available with funds provided by Andrew Carnegie, shown here. Carnegie believed in helping communities willing and able to help themselves. To receive a Carnegie grant, a community had to demonstrate the need for a public library, furnish a building site, and pay for staff and maintenance on the building through public funds. Grant recipients had to annually earmark 10% of the building's construction towards maintenance and offer free service to all patrons of the library. The Southern Library Association women hoped that both the city and county would partner with them in establishing a Carnegie Library. But while the city appointed a committee to look into the issue, there is no record of the subject mentioned, so apparently no further action was taken. In October 1930, Bibb Graves Hall opened on the Florence State Teachers College campus. Prior to its construction, an agreement was reached with President Dr. Henry J. Willingham to move the Southern Library to the first floor of the new building with the proviso that the university students be allowed free access to the library's collection. On January 18, 1934, the Florence Tribune reported that construction of a community house or community center at Monumental Park would house a public library, as well as a library in the county jail for inmates. And there was a county-wide drive to collect books to be sent to the county schools. In 1959, the site became that of the Florence-Lauderdale Coliseum. By September 1934, it looked as if Florence would finally get a public library. Florence's 3 newspapers reported that through the efforts of the City Commission and the Lauderdale County Relief Office, plans were being set in motion to establish a public library on the 2nd floor of City Hall, shown here. Relief Office employees were wallpapering the room and making repairs. Sturchy Brothers Furniture Store donated the wallpaper. Upon opening, the Relief Office would furnish a librarian. But for some reason still yet unknown to us, these plans too were frustrated, and no further reports on it have been found. 3 years later, in August 1937, plans were again in the works to establish a public library. By this time, the Southern Library had grown to 3,000 volumes, accumulated over 50 years, and housed on the first floor of Bibb Graves Hall. The yearly fee was still $1, but subscriptions were down. The renewed drive for a public library was being spearheaded by Florence's Exchange Club, the Junior Chamber of Commerce, or JCs, and a number of local women. Upon a request from a committee from the Exchange Club, headed by Dr. Roy Bassler, shown here, in October a library board was established. Dr. Bassler was president. A meeting of interested residents took place at the American Legion on South Court Street, shown in this image. The Florence Library Association was created to spearhead the drive for a public library. Local businessman Frank M. Perry, Jr. donated a downtown lot at the southwest corner of Court and Irvin Avenue. The donation was conditional upon building a public library costing not less than $10,000. For reasons not entirely understood, but possibly having to do with the fact that Florence was still feeling the effects of the Great Depression, this library was not built. In May 1938, city commissioners appointed the Florence Public Library Board. The board was to investigate the feasibility of establishing a public library. The board decided to sponsor a free library service at several locations throughout the city. These included the WPA Recreation Office in the courthouse, the Cherry Cotton Mills Community Center, supervised by the WPA, and the main library station at Bibb Graves Hall. In its May 20th issue, the Florence Herald reported that a free library station for African American residents was to be established at a recreational center currently being built near Burrell High School, shown here. This would be under WPA supervision. It is not known whether all of these free library stations were set up, or if they were, how long they remained open. In August 1943, at the request of Exchange Club member and County Health Officer Dr. Henry W. Cheney, a second library board was created, this time with the cooperation of the Lauderdale County Commission. Dr. Cheney was appointed chairman, A.R. Tomlinson secretary, and Professor Stanley Rosenbaum of Florence State College as treasurer. Mrs. Alberta Rogers and Florence Herald editor Harold S. May were appointed by the County Commission. A 7-member advisory board consisting of both county and city appointees was also created. The board's first meeting was held in 1944, and board members consulted with Mrs. Lois B. Green, director of the Alabama Public Library Service. The state would furnish some books. The Old Southern Library donated all of its assets, and other contributions were made by local residents. In February 1947, a branch library was opened on the second floor of H.B. Hudson's Variety Store in Rogersville, with Mrs. Margaret Harrison and Mrs. S.T. Byers serving as volunteer librarians. In July of that year, a library branch opened at Waterloo Town Hall. The Library Board and its advisory committee continued working into 1945, and things began to look promising when Manning and Susan Rogers King offered their house at 426 North Wood Avenue for sale to the Library Board for conversion into a library. Tentative plans for remodeling were drawn up, but it was ultimately decided that a new building would be more feasible and practical. Local businessman and philanthropist Louis Rosenbaum, who owned Muscle Shoals Theaters, and his wife Anna donated $25,000 through the Lieutenant Alvin Rosenbaum Foundation to kickstart a renewed effort to build a public library. This was on August 30th, 1945, at the end of World War II. The Rosenbaums later gave an additional $15,000, increasing their contribution to $40,000. Also, in August that year, Post Number 11, American Legion in Florence, announced through its commander, Julian Bailey, that it was donating $1,200 towards the purchase of a bookmobile, which would be operated by a trained librarian in rural areas of the county upon the opening of the public library. Columbia University graduate Miss Marion Neal was hired as county librarian with oversight of the bookmobile before it was even provided by the American Legion. The bookmobile was a 1948 Chevrolet one-ton panel truck converted in order to house a mobile library of some 800 volumes. This photo shows the formal presentation by Commander Bailey to Dr. Cheney in August 1948. On October 1st, 1945, through the generosity of Clyde W. Anderson and L.S. Kane, a temporary location for the public library had been secured in the dining room of Hotel Reader on East Tennessee Street. The room had a private entrance. The Tennessee Valley Authority discontinued a certain phase of its library service and donated more than 7,800 volumes to the public library. The state contributed more than $3,000 worth of books and loaned more than 400 volumes. Nearly 2,000 volumes were gifts from library patrons. Evelyn Peeler, head librarian of the Stanley County Public Library in Albemarle, North Carolina, was hired as head librarian. She was assisted by Catherine Green of Fayetteville, Tennessee, County Librarian Marion Neal, Mrs. Mildred Crow, Mrs. Gladys Robertson, Martha Wallace, Betty Cole, who worked as a page, and student intern Eugene Ledbetter. On February 11, 1946, the library opened for business. Those first few months, the library was open 16 hours a week. Some 3,000 volumes a month were in circulation. Reporting on its first anniversary in February 1947, according to the Florence Herald and Florence Times, circulation for the first fiscal year was 29,661 books. 50% of that total were juvenile books. The library was now open full-time from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., Mondays through Fridays, and Saturdays from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m., and Thursday nights from 7 to 9. It was supported by city and county, with TVA paying the library for service to its employees. In early February 1946, property located on the east side of North Wood Avenue between Mobile and Tom Bigby Streets was purchased from Mr. and Mrs. Madding King for $5,000. The proposed one-story building with basement was estimated to cost $110,000. Architect Howard Griffiths of Sheffield was hired to design it. A fundraising campaign began immediately, and many local firms and individuals made donations, some as memorials, like this one for Navy Lieutenant Walter Matthews, who died in World War II. After a series of initial bids by area contractors was rejected, W.D. Brooks, a local contractor, was hired. The project's cost totaled $135,000. On June 23, 1948, what the Florence Herald described as, quote, brief but impressive ceremonies, unquote, the cornerstone for the new library building was laid. Those in the photo include, from left, Henry Grady Richards, Marion Neal, Judge Robert M. Hill, Harold S. May, Alberta Rogers, Dr. Henry W. Cheney, Stanley Rosenbaum, W. B. Brooks, Louis Rosenbaum, Henry A. Bradshaw, Jewett T. Flagg, William H. Mitchell, and Catherine Green. The new library building had a limestone front and was built of brick and concrete. The Florence Garden Club donated the shrubbery. On either side of the main entrance were 12 by 8 feet display windows, and the lobby of the building was painted red. Bronze plaques with the names of donors and founding patrons hung inside the lobby. These plaques now hang in the lobby of the present-day library building. The building's interior was gray with dark red molding. It had Kelly green drapes, red leather sofas, and green, yellow, and beige chairs. The main floor housed an adult fiction and nonfiction section, a periodical corner, and a phonograph library, as well as a teenage corner and children's area. The basement housed a stack room containing back issues of magazines and duplicate copies of books. It also contained 2 small music listening rooms and offices for the Florence Recreation Department. On Sunday, January 9, 1949, an open house was held from 2 to 6 p.m. with more than 1,700 people attending. Many individuals signed the guest book, which we still have, and the title page of which is shown here. Mrs. Bessie Cash of Cloverdale, which is about 9 miles northwest of Florence, was the first guest to sign the book. Each visitor was given a small pamphlet on the history of the library. Several prominent out-of-town and out-of-state guests attended, including librarians from across Alabama. Refreshments were served by the wives of the library board members, while members of several Lauderdale County women's clubs, civic organizations, and library volunteers served as hostesses. Flowers were provided by several local businesses and individuals. Meanwhile, a regional library board had been created in October 1947 and included members of boards from Florence-Lauderdale, Sheffield, Leeton, and Colbert County, with the assistance of the Public Library Service Division of the state of Alabama. The 9-member board was created by Colbert and Lauderdale County Commissioners and the city councils of Florence and Sheffield. The Helen Keller Library in Tuscumbia became part of the regional library system in the 1950s. In 1992, the Florence-Lauderdale Public Library withdrew from the regional library and at that time affiliated with the Lauderdale County Regional Library System. After the regional board was created, a public library was established to serve African American residents in Florence. Originally named the Florence Negro Library, this new facility, a branch library of the Muscle Shoals Regional Library System, was established in 1948 and located in the former parsonage of Tennessee Valley Community Church on North Pine Street, next door to what was then the Lauderdale County Jail. Intended to serve the African American community at a time when whites and blacks were still segregated, the library was designed to also serve African American residents in Colbert County until a similar library in Sheffield could be completed. Mrs. Josephine Kimber served as librarian, working under the direction of Regional Librarian Miss Catherine Green. Responsibility for the management of the new library was in the hands of a three-person board comprised of local physician Dr. Leonard Jerry Hicks, Professor W.H. Lewis of Burrell High School, and Mrs. Eva Simpson. More than 100 guests, including members of the Regional and Negro Branch Library Boards, attended the open house held on March 22, 1948. Refreshments were served by the Women's Council of Florence and the Y Teens of Burrell High School. In April 1948, a contest was sponsored by the Board of Directors. Florence-Lauderdale Public Library Board member A.R. Tomlinson offered a $10 award to the African American student who could write the best essay on naming the new library. It was named after W.C. Handy. Local historian, the late Alvin Rosenbaum, wrote in the introduction to his book, The Muscle Shoals, First Frontier of These United States, that his father, Stanley, a Florence State professor and local civil rights activist, was the treasurer of the Florence-Lauderdale Public Library Board. He writes, "The Negro Library, a part of the library system, was at the corner of Mobile and Pine Streets, a small building with a tin roof next to the red brick Lauderdale County Jail. In the 1950s, the part-time librarian submitted an estimate for a new roof. The books were getting wet from the rain, which was more than the building was worth, according to Stanley. With board approval, he directed the Negro Library be closed, the books to be transferred to the main library facility, and the water fountain to be shut off and the restrooms locked to meet Alabama's Jim Crow laws. The facility was integrated without public comment or incident, and was perhaps the first public facility in Alabama to integrate, circa 1956. By August 1965, it was recognized that the Florence-Lauderdale Public Library, one of 4 libraries in the Muscle Shoals Regional Library System and serving as its headquarters, needed to expand in order to meet the needs of the community. An estimated 142,000 two-story addition to be constructed in the courtyard at the rear of the library was planned. This expansion would double the library's size to 17,450 square feet. The addition included a mezzanine that eventually housed the Milton C. Dunn Local History Genealogy Department and provided space for a study area, reference and periodical rooms, as well as new desks, shelving, and equipment. B.H. Craig Construction Company of Florence received the contract, and by April 1967, construction on the addition had begun. It was completed in 1968. In September 1983, the Florence-Lauderdale Public Library requested a dramatic increase in its funding in order to bring it up to state standards. At that time, the library was open 5 days a week for a total of 39 hours a week, as compared to 68 hours a week in 1978. Services had been extended to 31 homebound individuals, 3 nursing homes, 1 hospital, 3 senior citizens apartment complexes, bookmobile services to the county, and regular visits to Handy Homes and Cherry Hill Homes. Florence-Lauderdale's library also fell far short of the state's minimum number of books, periodicals, and recordings for a city the size of Florence. On September 19, 1983, an ad hoc group met at Florence's City Auditorium. About 150 attended for the purposes of establishing a Friends of the Library group. The goals, as stated in the Friends' first newsletter of March-April 1984, were to bring the library up to state standards in books, materials, and staff, to act as a unifying agent in city and county, and to support the library via books, money, and fundraising drives. During its first 5 months as an organization, the Friends of the Library raised $16,000 for the public library. In 1988, they obtained and donated to the library 3 historic oil paintings from the Sweetwater Mansion. In September 1983, a significant addition was made to the library building. It involved the conversion of the bookmobile garage into an addition to the main area of the library for the expansion of the Milton C. Dunn Local History and Genealogy Room. The Florence Lions Club donated $5,000 to jumpstart the expansion. In 1999, a full-time librarian historian was hired to supervise this room. The room has been generously supported over the years by the Natchez Trace Genealogical Society, the Florence Exchange Club, and the Retired Senior Volunteer Program, or RSVP. At a meeting of the Florence-Lauderdale Public Library Board of Trustees in May 1996, Florence City Councilman Dick Jordan, who represented District 2, commented that he felt it was the city's responsibility to finance a new library building. In the fall of 1998, an evaluation of the old library building found it inadequate for remodeling. A public library building committee was soon formed. The Alabama State Library Service was consulted, studies were done, cost estimates tabulated, community meetings held, and a local architect was hired to create preliminary drawings. This fundraising brochure outlined the need for a new library building. First Baptist Church expressed an interest in selling the 3 lots they owned on Tombigbee between Wood Avenue and Walnut Streets and purchasing the old library facilities. From approximately 1933 until 1961, Brown Service Funeral Home occupied the site, and by 1962, Hood Tire Exchange was located on the lot. On November 27, 1997, these 3 lots and 2 adjacent lots owned by the Archer Estate were purchased for $210,000 by the Deerpoint Corporation. The corporation was comprised of AmSouth Bank President Robert Redd, SunTrust Bank President Robert E. McNally III, Bank Independent President Mac Malden, Compass Bank President Gary Ryan, and First Southern Bank President Charles E. Frederick Jr. In April 1999, Lambert Ezel Architects in Florence was contracted to design the 39,000 square foot building at 350 North Wood Avenue, across from Wilson Park and 1 block up from the old library building. McCrory Builders of Birmingham was awarded the contract to build the new facility for $5.6 million. John McCrory had attended Story Hour as a young boy in the old library building, and his mother, the late Carolyn McCrory, was instrumental in opening the Friends of the Library bookstore, which found a home in the new building along with the coffee shop. An art committee carefully selected an impressive collection of local art for display throughout the building. A statue was also commissioned and placed in the first floor rotunda. Florence Main Street's Design Committee contracted with New York designer and Florence, Alabama native Anne Leslie Warren to design a 10-foot diameter permanent medallion in the center of the floor in the main lobby. She enlisted the assistance of a Dutch artist to create this beautiful mosaic, which harkens to Florence being the Renaissance city, and according to tradition, named after Florence, Italy. Inscribed in Latin in 3 places on the medallion is the phrase, "From the Books of Florence," a fitting slogan for the new library. To grace the front of the facade of the building, a frieze from the old Gilbert Elementary School was repurposed. The frieze was created circa 1918 by English immigrant James Abbott Stowes, founder of the Florence Marble Works. When the Gilbert Elementary School was destroyed by fire in July 1981, the frieze was salvaged and incorporated into the rear of Hibbett School. In 2002, the Florence City Board of Education allowed the frieze to be removed from Hibbett and placed above the front entrance of the new library building. Invitations were sent out by the mayor and city council for the official groundbreaking ceremony. That ceremony was held Friday, May 11, 2001. Library board members at the time of the groundbreaking were J. Edward Tees, Patricia Bowles Butler, Peter Payne, Simpson Russell, and Libby Watts. December 2002, a donor party was held for those who had made sizable contributions to the new library. Among those donors were the Andersons, owners of Books A Million, who generously donated $500,000 toward a $2 million library endowment fund. The Andersons donated an additional $100,000 for book purchases to be followed for the first 3 years with $50,000 for book purchases. The Andersons would go on to create a library foundation to benefit the public library. Tuesday, December 10, 2002, at 10 a.m., the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the new library took place. A large crowd assembled for the ribbon-cutting ceremony and open house. Over the past 20 years, the Florence-Lauderdale Public Library has grown and expanded, due in large part to the support of our patrons, as well as the city and county commissions, and of course, the Friends of the Library. Now serving as a community gathering place, lecture hall, theater, music hall, education center, and still, of course, the place to check out the latest bestsellers, the Florence-Lauderdale Public Library has come a long way from its humble beginnings as the Ladies' Library over 140 years ago. Our modern facility in many ways resembles Florence's early 20th century community houses. We honor the original vision of those early trailblazers and are proud to continue that vision with this free public library open to all individuals. Here's to the next 20 years.